Ladies and gentlemen, we're back today. We've got somebody I'm excited to talk with. We've got Dr. Michelle Perro. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Chris. How are you?
Well, considering the state of the world, I'd say I'm doing okay. You are a veteran pediatrician, co-founder of the Regeneration Health International. What else am I missing? What else projects do you got going on?
Big projects, gmoscience.org. We founded that in 2014, website focused on education and regarding GMOs, pesticides, genetic engineering with a lens on health. And the new MDs podcast, Mothers, Doctors, and Scientists with Stephanie Seneff and Zen Honeycutt. Wrote a book, What's Making Our Children Sick, working on book 2 now, Making Our Children Well, and a few other things. Been around a while, Chris.
So take me on your academic journey in medicine, and then how you sort of shifted and noticed that these pesticides or whatever were, and our food was so important.
Yeah, when you've been practicing 40 years, the story gets long and convoluted, but I'll give you the thumbnail. And what happened was I'm a pediatric emergency physician by training. I worked inner city hospitals, busy emergency departments, and then my own son had some health challenges 30 years ago, and I had a serendipitous encounter with a homeopath. And homeopathy changed my son's health. And I was, hardcore academic institution doc. And when I saw that, I thought, okay, we got a situation here because there's stuff I can do that I didn't know about. And I was really outraged that there were alternative ways of healing, which I had never even heard of. So I started learning about homeopathy and natural health and holistic health. And in the early 2000s, I shifted into my own practice, mostly doing integrative urgent care, but people were coming to me with urgent care issues. Oh, by the way, my kid's on his ear infection. My kids have chronic abdominal pain for 3 years. My kid has a change in their neurocognition. And I started seeing this decline in children's health. And it was pretty rapid. It was early 2000s. And I had already been practicing for almost 20 years. And I thought, what the heck is going on? So I learned about GMOs and pesticides through some moms here in this county where I live in Northern California. One mom handed me the book by Jeffrey Smith, Seeds of Deception, still my friend and colleague. We still are working on projects together. I read Jeffrey's book, learned about GMOs and pesticides, read about the work of Dr. Arpad Pusti, the first scientist to study the effects of GMOs on health in the UK, in the Rowan Institute. And I had so many light bulbs popping off where I started putting the pieces together between GMOs and pesticides. You don't need a GMO alone, and what was happening in our kids' guts and the subsequent neurocognitive changes that I was seeing. And I literally 180 degreed my career to include complex chronically ill children, environmental toxicants, including pesticides and others. It's not the only one, but it's a big one. Kids eat a lot. Wrote the book and just began lecturing here abroad about the chronic poisoning of our children and what's making them sick. So that, I mean, that's a long answer, but that's indeed what happened.
So, and as you get into it, and you start researching the companies that make these products, what did you discover? What was your reaction?
Oh, shock, horror, disbelief, cynicism. I did a dance on that one, I'll tell you. I know more about Monsanto Bayer than I know about my own kids sometimes. When I really understood, and when I read the first GMO study on rats done by Monsanto, now Bayer, and the study had findings in it which they declared as not clinically significant. So even in Monsanto's own work, when they did a 3-month study on some rats, and they removed the rats that died from eating GMOs, by the way, they found issues, but they said, yep, there are these issues like abnormal blood work and reproductive issues, et cetera, but they're not clinically significant. And that's the same thing the Impossible Burger did, by the way, by Impossible Foods. Oh yeah, rats had some issues, but they're not significant. Well, who's saying that? So I was horrified by the work about Monsanto. And, some of the stuff, it's really in plain sight, a lot of the horror. So, for example, I learned a lot about glyphosate, the key ingredient, and Roundup Ready herbicides. Glyphosate was patented by Monsanto, then Monsanto, in 2003, and then in 2010 as an antibiotic, and a very effective antibiotic. So here we are giving our children and adults eat this stuff too, daily dosing of antibiotics, which literally devastates the microbiome. Great data from Germany on that, from a veterinarian, by the way, Dr. Monica Kruger from 2013 and 2015, and Dr. Ackerman. And it decimates the microbiome. And we now know definitively that that autism, for example, which is now 1 in 20 kids in California, is directly linked to changes in the microbiome. So finally, it's become clear, one of the pathways, and there are others, how glyphosate is directly linked to autism. And that should be clear, because if you want to talk I was going to say pandemics, we should talk about the pandemic of autistic spectrum disorder, which is now globally affecting children, and those kids have significant challenges, neurocognitive, and all. It's a huge spectrum of disorders. Glyphosate being at the base of so many of those kids via the microbiome. And there are other pathways too. We can get into it if you want, Chris. I
Yeah.
don't know how much you want to these weeds.
30 minutes. We'll do the best we can, but you come back anytime
Okay.
and we'll just.
I'll zip up over there. Okay.
No, we love to get into it. I've been 2 hours on this program just complaining about the state of, chemical companies with people. So you mentioned autism now, and there's also, I've seen a correlation between how much the spraying of glyphosate has increased over time, and then of course the increase in Parkinson's over time. Is there anything else that you're seeing as a doctor that's going up, and that maybe we can, put A and B together and say,
Oh, yeah. So, okay, let's talk about obesity. So obesity is no pun intended, massive problem. I'll focus on kids. It's adults as well. 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 children is now considered obese. Obesity is not a benign disease. It is associated with cardiovascular, metabolic dysregulation, diabetes, hypertension, not to mention the self-esteem issues that people undergo with obesity and bullying and that sort of thing. And glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. So it affects these metabolic pathways that are linked to obesity. So it's it's an obesogen causing obesity. So glyphosate alone, and remember, when they use these herbicide formulation, it's not just glyphosate. Some of the other inerts are not inert, and they make the glyphosate more toxic. For example, in Roundup, there are these surfactants called POEA, which break down cell membranes, which allow the glyphosate to get into cells and do more harm. Glyphosate is a metal chelator, so it binds essential minerals like zinc and magnesium. When those key minerals, which you need for brain function, are bound up and not utilized, the brain can't function as well. And you can have all types of brain disorders secondary to that, ranging from autism to Alzheimer's to brain fog, where people's brains are not working and they have all kinds of neurosensory challenges. So we've got an antibiotic, a metal chelator, an endocrine disruptor, and it blocks the pathway for detoxification. In the liver, it blocks the cytochrome P450 pathway. You have two main pathways for detox in your body. The microbiome is one. It definitely decimates the microbiome. Number two is your liver. So when the liver can't detox, what happens is we are in a sea of hurt, particularly from heavy metals and other toxicants, and we can't clear them. So we get elevated toxic load, and kids and adults are toxic. And this environmental medical tsunami is unknown and undiagnosed by mainstream medicine or conventional physicians who are not trained in environmental medicine. Not only they're not trained, they don't know how to test for it, they don't know how to treat it. But I can tell you the main treatment is remove the root cause, which are the pesticides, the chemical inputs. And we can talk about soil decimation. If you can have the soil is decimated and you're growing these plants without key nutrients. So the nutritive content of our food over the past 40 years has plummeted. And even organics, the nutritive content has decreased. So we have people who are eating well, but there's no nutritive value. It's gone way down. You need more food to what compared to, I think it's about 40 years now where it's way low. So we have soil depletion, healthier soil. We're all about not just organic, we're all about organic regenerative agriculture. And we all know that's a key ingredient for, carbon sequestration. So regenerative organic agriculture is the way forward. And so we have this huge battle against big ag. And big ag is, I could tell you right here in our government through lobbying. So our big ag and government very cozy, and that relationship has to be broken. We have to support local farming, and this is a sidebar. But if I had my way, I would teach every kid in every school, starting from the lowest up to high school, even college, how to grow their own plants. Farming, that should be in the curriculum. Is how every kid should know how to grow their food.
So obviously, you come at this from a medical point of view, but then by the end of learning all these horrific things, you become kind of a political radical because you realize that the system is broken, right?
Yes. I never saw myself as an activist. I've always been a healthcare provider. Like since I was 12, I worked in hospitals. I was a candy stripe girl. Those are the girls in the pink uniforms working in hospitals. So I've been caretaking for kids as long as I could like literally walk. And now I have the sense that we need to exit the medical system and create our own paradigm shift to integrative health. And we're trying to do that, but it's not happening fast enough. The conventional medical model is not serving people's chronic illnesses now. So not only am I having to treat people with environmental illness, having to exit the system because there's nothing there to help them as we create these parallel situations in either farming, education, to kind of regain our terrain, our biologic terrain. So indeed, I have become an activist of sorts. I'm politically outspoken in that sense because our kids are suffering. And if you have a sick kid, you have a sick family, no doubt. Because if the kid is sick, for example, 2/3 of kids under the age of 10 years old have sleep disorders. So if a kid has dysomnia and they're not sleeping well, and the whole family's awake and they're not sleeping well, you have a dysfunctional family. So we have to help families get back on track and get their health back. The first way is food is medicine. And the best way to do it is back to organic. And I don't say just organic anymore, Chris. I say organic regenerative food. And so we want healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy kids.
Yeah. And for me, I want healthy animals. That means I go vegan, so I don't even eat the animals. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really hard. It's not hard to do, but if you do it right, plan ahead. It's after a while it becomes routine. It's easy. So let me ask you this on kind of a sidebar. Now talking about not getting to the root causes of things, there's this drug called Ozempic that people are taking. What's your reaction to this idea?
Well, once I've like pulled myself off the floor out of my chair and closed my jaw, there was Idiocracy. That should be the new movie. Idiocracy knows no bounds. The American Academy of Pediatrics several months ago in their wisdom said, gosh, children who are obese over the year 12 can receive this drug Ozempic. Great marketing. They have a catchy song. Every 20 seconds on American TV, there is, another drug ad. Ozempic takes a lot of time. They must be paying big money for advertising. But anyway, Ozempic is a disaster for children. I mean, there are health sequelae associated with this drug. And we did a nice write-up on Children's Health Defense, if anyone wants to take a look at that, on what is wrong with Ozempic, a toxic drug for children, not to mention that the American Academy of Pediatrics and their wisdom said for kids who are obese, it's for, they were using it for obesity, okay to use bariatric surgery in children over the age of 12. And I thought, well, let's not address the root cause that these kids are eating, Doritos and Coca-Cola. Well, I call those companies out, but it could be any junk food, and especially in schools. Now, remember, here in the U.S., during school year, some kids eat 1 to 3 meals in school every day. Moms Across America did a school lunch study a couple of months ago, which showed that 95% of school lunches that they tested 43 school lunches across the U.S., 95% of them contain pesticides. 100% of them tested for heavy metals. 75% of them tested for veterinarian drugs. That's what our kids are eating. And you want to know why children are sick. So we are feeding them poisoned food. We are giving them toxic drugs to deal with the sequelae of poisoned food. Chris, this makes no sense.
This is why I drink, Dr. Perro.
I could go for a nice organic glass of Cabernet as well. But yes, this is why we need some self-medication with an occasional glass of wine to help offset this and go for a run or a swim. It's pretty hot here in California right now. So it's just idiocy. And I'm asking, that's why one of my goals right now with the second book I'm writing, I'm trying to get it right to parents and bypass the system. If your pediatrician, your practitioner, family practice doc is not talking about this, the time would be better served you learning this on your own. I'm teaching people food is medicine, nutrition, how to eat at home, how to eat out of your kitchen for health. And I'm teaching homeopathy, my favorite tool for everyone, animals, kids, the elderly. Homeopathy is brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. I can say it myself. I use it every time as a first line of defense before I go to the harsh, industrial made, heartless pharmaceuticals. So, besides the glyphosate and the industrial food, I know you wrote about this. What else is really is chronic illnesses or problems with children and people in general?
Yeah, yeah. So the main issue, so we've got, okay, so we talked about the obesity, we talked about the neurocognitive issues like autism, ADHD, learning challenges, big time. Also, asthma and allergies skyrocketing. For asthma example, 1 in 6 to 1 in 9 children now has asthma. Not a common, but not a benign disease. And some of us now think of asthma as an autoimmune disease. Food allergies, real food allergies, food intolerances, and food sensitivities. Children are not born with gluten and dairy sensitivity. Something has shifted in their guts because just about every kid I'm seeing now has a food sensitivity. That did not exist 25 years ago. Okay, that is a new problem. Children did not have gluten sensitivity, and that's a combination. I don't think we have a gluten problem. I think we have a glyphosate problem. We have changed the wheat to be a more hybridized wheat in the US versus corn wheat that we're eating, hundreds of years ago. But in addition, glyphosate based herbicides are used off label as crop desiccants. So those products like wheat, like legumes, like oats are highly sprayed, and kids eat a lot of these foods. So filled with glyphosate. So we've got food allergies and gut issues. And then we have rising levels of autoimmunity in children as well, in adults. And cancer is harder to track in kids. It's rising in kids, super common in adults because cancers take a long time to develop, except the turbo cancers we're seeing now, but that's another topic. But, I've seen stats from 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women in the US are going to develop cancer, which is horrifying. And we're seeing cancers now in younger people and more aggressive. Right now, there's a cancer surge. So autoimmune dysregulation comes from intestinal permeability issues, which comes from GMOs and pesticides and the disruption in the microbiome. So the microbiome, that collection of organisms that makes up mostly in your colon, but you have microbiomes in your eyes, your oral cavity, on your skin. If you're at a conference and you don't like the guy next to you, it might be your microbes are not communicating well to each other. So these microbes, which the baby inherits from mom, and if it's a C-section and not breastfed, we got problems from birth, inherits from mom, those microbes set up the baby's immune function. So their immunity stems from passage through mom being the steward of immunity. So if mom's health is not pristine, she's passing off that microbial signature. Baby's immune system is set up, their innate and then adaptive immune systems. And by 3 years old, the microbiome is pretty set. But those microbes are responsible for immune function, detoxification, as I mentioned, production of vitamins, and production of neurotransmitters, those chemicals that run your brain, like serotonin, made by your gut microbes. So if they're not happy, for whatever reasons, you can have all sorts of gut-brain axis dysregulation, not to mention mood disorders, way high in kids now, depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the kind of the quick answer. Did I answer
Oh
your
no,
question? I don't know.
you're like one of my favorite guests ever because you know so much about the thing that I want to learn about. And yeah. Um, no, I mean, I was going to ask you about can we draw a conclusion about the mental health crisis in America? I mean, look at the state of politics. It seems to me that people in America, I've left, for several years, but it seems like people have just lost all ability to reason with logic and act with common decency.
I suspect that in America, we have a loss of decency issue, correct? I think we have a massive gut issue because most Americans are not eating organic. It's not accessible. Many people think it's some elitist fantasy, some hippy dippy thing, and it's hard to find. There is some cross contamination, according to the USDA, about 5 to 9% of organic crops are contaminated with GMOs and pesticides because organic field right next to a conventional field. Um, so I would suspect that many people, whether they're, doing no good in society, perhaps our politicians probably have gut disorders. The way I know that, Chris, is a friend of mine did a study a couple of years ago looking at the oatmeal cookies here in our government, Sacramento, California, and found 234 parts per billion of glyphosate in the oatmeal cookies served to our senators and assembly members here in California. That's enormous. Dr. Michael Antoniou out of the UK, King's College, found that zero point 0.1 parts per billion caused non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in rats in a study several years ago. So this is massive amounts of glyphosate and effects on health. If the gut's affected, there's something called the gut-brain axis. I call it the gut-brain microbiome axis that goes up the vagus nerve, your enteric nervous system, and talks and communicates directly. And it's the microbes produce these products called metabolic response modifiers. And these products go up there, chat up, and the brain and gut being your second brain, are in constant communication. So if I see somebody with a mental health disorder, first thing I do is check their gut. And you'll find dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of the microbiome, lots of bad players. And when you start to re regulate their diet, so shift the diet, eliminate certain foods, repopulate with beneficial microbes, the mood shifts. And then you restore nutrients because they're often nutrient deficient, particularly the B vitamins,
You know,
not to mention the minerals.
I find it incredible that even the captains of industry we have, your Warren Buffetts and your Elon Musks, they have the same diet, meaning they have the same neurological impairments, basically. And I see that in the behavior of capitalists in general and our kind of valueless. But that's another topic. But still, that plays into the whole thing. And I think the capitalism thing is the reason why we can't get on top of this issue, right? So,
You know, I'm not sure if it's the capitalism or this relationship between regulators, government officials, and industry, whether it's big ag, big tobacco, big pharma, big telly, communications industry, and their cozy lobbying. Is anyone not bought by industry? I think they buy both parties. America's a two-party system. I think it should be a three-party, and RFK should run on another party. I'll just throw one political comment in there. Um, but we there, I hate to imply that everyone is bought, but let's look at where they receive lobbying dollars from. Who You can see which senators are, here in the US, where they got their lobbying money. It's discoverable. We can all see that. And you can imagine who's like paying to play. So until we stop allowing our senators and assembly members to be accepting lobbying dollars, which should never happen, get those people out of there. It's a revolving door. The head from Monsanto at the time, Michael Taylor, was going back between the USD, was it the FDA or the USD? I think it was the FDA. Pardon me, I can't remember which three-letter organization it was, but it was a revolving door between, his name is Michael Taylor, between running organizations. And this has just got to stop. And we need our regulatory agencies are no longer regulating. And glyphosate levels here in the U.S. and our urine keep rising. So what does industry tell regulators to do? Increase the amount that's acceptable. So the ADA, the amount that of glyphosate you can have in your urine every day goes up, and how much we can eat. So it's this cozy, callous, unconstitutional relationship that we need to. It's not serving our children, and I'm thinking, hey, these senators have kids and grandkids too. Aren't they worried about their children?
That's what I don't get is that even then they must go home and not feed their kid. They'll feed their kids the organic stuff, but that's not true. They all buy into the lie that it's safe as long as we say it's safe, and anybody who says not is a kook. But there's enough evidence right now. Like I said, the consensus on it scientifically is 50-50. I mean, you've obviously scoured over some scientific studies too. How can you say something about the conflicts of interest in the science?
Oh yeah, gosh, boy, has that ever been clarified during COVID? When so industry is in university settings, big ag. They have they purchased, they're at UC Davis, they're at Berkeley, they're at Purdue, they're at University of Washington, they're in Cornell. I think Cornell should be called Gates University now. So they have infiltrated. We know from the data that when industry funds a study, I think it was over 2/3 of the studies come out in favor of industry. Oh, what a surprise. So that's another relationship. There's no reason why we should not be funding colleges in the university setting out with taxpayer money and remove industry. That needs to happen immediately. So having the Alliance for Science at Cornell, that doesn't serve Cornell. It totally biases, skews the data that they produce. So in my mind, the data is biased. Additionally, so many food studies, when they look at food studies, when they're mostly done in animal studies, and it's an accepted norm that when we use, for example, rodent studies, that we can extrapolate that to human health. We're not biopsying humans' brains and their guts to see what the effects are. They don't feed those rodents organic chow. So the findings become narrowed. So they're feeding them conventional chow. That's why oftentimes they don't find big differences in study findings. So unless they're feeding those animals organics, which they're not, because I look at every one of those studies, Chris, I said, wait, you gave the rats conventional chow? You're going to narrow the differences between the control group and the study group. How can I use that data? So what I've gone on, because I've been practicing 41 years, that's hard to believe, I have thousands of anecdotes. And back in the day, your case studies, my patients, could be considered valid information. Now people want empiric data. They want to see rat studies. I've got thousands of kids I worked on, thousands. When I change their diet, kids get better. I could do this in my sleep. I swear to goodness. I've gone to the point in my career where if I start working with a family, if they're not willing to change their diet, I tell them they're wasting my time and I'm wasting your money. That they must change their diet first, because kids even if they get better initially, if whatever I'm giving them, they relapse if you don't change the diet.
It's
I mean, a family has to be committed. Whole foods.
it's fair
Whole
to,
food.
yeah. It's fair to say that one of the biggest drivers of disease is food, or
Yes.
what goes in.
So, I wrote back in November 2021, I was horrified some things happening during COVID. I wrote the global internet. I wrote the Global Children's Environmental Health Bill of Rights because I felt our children were at enormous risk. And the first one is food. The second one I put down is water, because even here in the US, look at Flint, Michigan, kids drinking leaded water, neurotoxin. I mean, leaded pipes here in California too, not just Michigan, where kids are drinking from. Air pollution is a major killer for everyone. It's probably the leading killer, is air pollution. Um, Experimental medications and injections, and we don't need to go out into that unless you want to. Um, E-waste. Children and women harvest e-waste from all our electronic dumping, which happens in countries that are not prepared to handle this e-waste. It's in China, different countries in Africa. Brazil has a few regulated plants in Sao Paulo, e-waste. And my last one is Hollywood and the internet. I picked TikTok. It could be, I don't mean to signal out TikTok. It could be a lot of Hollywood, which I think are hurting our children. And so those are the environmental toxicants that I believe are harming children right now. But food is number one, but water, air, experimental therapies, e-waste, and the internet are also harming our children. So if we really want to walk the walk, talk the talk, Chris, we will support a bill of rights for our children so that they have access to basically clean air, water, and food. I don't think that's too much to ask. And that is removing industry from the equation, getting rid of chemical inputs in our food and stop chronically poisoning our children.
Yeah. All for money too. All to make some extra money. And the part about the internet too is whatever ads you see on TikTok are generally for whatever the poison is that you can ingest, you know. The advertisement is just a scourge on humanity, and it usually advertises the exact thing that's making them unhappy while promising them happiness in return. Yeah. So, well, let's have you back on. You're a wonderful human being, fun to talk with, scary to talk with. You have a book out. It's called "What's Making Our Children Sick." I really recommend it. There'll be a link in the description. Can you talk a little bit about the book you're going to write next, and then
Yeah, yeah. So that book was very academic. I wrote it with a wonderful co-author, Dr. Adams. She's a medical anthropologist, and it was just based on my patients. And when Dr. Adams came to my office, she's a professor at UCSF. She didn't believe a word I said when I was explaining all this to her and what I was seeing in kids, and their intestinal guts were a mess, leaky gut, and they had dysbiosis and neurocognitive changes. She didn't believe any of it. By the 20th patient, she sat in my office, interviewed patients with me, and she went, "Oh my God." She got it. And she did a 180 flip. And we wrote the book. We chose 10 of my patients to write about. But but I also am an eternal optimist. You said, really? You don't sound like an optimist. I am an optimist. I'm a bit cynical. I'm from New York, but I am an optimist because I believe we can change this around. And the way we're going to do it is through regenerative organic farming. And I know it. I know that's the way forward. Parents taking back their kids' health, parents in control, empowering parents. And I said, I got to teach parents how to do this on a global scale, making our children well. And this is a handbook for parents, not heavily referenced or academic. It's how to, clean, simple. It's going to be down and dirty for busy parents. And we're going to have all the nutritional formulas that we use, easy to use in the kitchen, and homeopathic solutions. And we have it. A whole program for stages for ages that I wrote, what different development of kids and what their needs are. So that's how I broke it up. I call it stages for ages, and all the nutritional and all the homeopathics that might be required during those age times, from pre-pregnancy to adolescence. And adolescence seems to go to 30 years old these days in the US, but let's stop at 18, but goes on a bit. So that's what we're doing. I'm very excited about it. I'm writing it literally as we speak, and I keep my tushy in a chair because it's hard to stay seated, but I can't. I've been writing only because I can only see so many people in a day, and how do we reach the masses? And I want this to be affordable, downloadable manual that, and I swear if people can't afford to pay for it, I would give it away, because the idea is to get information into the hands of people who need it, and that is everyone. And I hope to get it published in, Spanish, Chinese, German, get it out there, and before I become compost.
and I hope to read it before I turn compost. Yeah, and next time you come on, let's give it out and let's tell the people. And it's true that there's not that many hours in the day, and I'm glad that you were able to spend one with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll say goodbye, and then we'll talk right after this. Thank you for coming, everybody. Be sure to check out the book and change your diet, change your life, guys. All right. See you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, Chris. Bye.